Welcome to Whiskey Ace. In our next episode of A Journey in Whiskey, we're going to talk about casks. We're only actually going to talk about the very basic aspects of casks because it's so complex. So let's talk about the most used cask, which is a ex-bourbon cask. And it became very popular and quite easy for Scotland to get a hold of these things. Actually in 1964, US Congress passed a law that all bourbon casks must be used only once. They had to be new, white oak, and only used once. So what did they do? Throw them away? Well, no, they obviously did sell them, but probably not for a lot of money back then. And it turns out that ex-bourbon casks are just perfect for single malt whiskey. And they use white oak trees, mainly Missouri, Arkansas, that kind of area. And what they do when making a bourbon, which we will cover quite a long time from now, but we will cover bourbons, is they char the inside of the cask. And this will bring out vanilla compounds. And you know we've talked about being able to nose the vanilla on a ex-bourbon cask. And this is what happens. So also Kentucky, quite hot and matures much faster. So I think, now that there's actually, it's more popular to drink bourbon everywhere in the world. There's even more of these casks readily available after 3 or 4 years. And this is basically still the #1 type of cask. It's a hogshead, as they call it, smaller in capacity, around say 250 liters of whiskey, as opposed to a sherry butt, which is double that in capacity. Where it gets very tricky is when we talk about first fill. It's been in bourbon and then it's gone to Scotland and had whiskey matured in that cask. It's then called a first fill, and you can go as high as using it 3, 4, 5 times. I'll get to that in a second. The second is the sherry butt, and similar style of oak, but with the US has a much finer grain than the European. In northern Spain they're in abundance and they're cut at exactly 100 years old, taken down to Jerez, and that's where the sherry is. Now, it used to be so easy to get sherry casks in the UK, and if you remember Bristol Cream sherry, they would just ship it in bulk in the big casks and carry on maturing it in the UK and bottle it. So they used to be readily available sherry casks way before 1964, and more recently European Union actually stopped that, so that they do have to be matured for a certain length of time in Spain before they can come to the UK. Anyway, so that's just a little basic idea for you on bourbon and sherry. Now, what happens after that is where it gets extremely complex. And bear in mind, whiskey and blending, it so reminds me of the old wine days and Bordeaux still today, or many of the old world countries, Italy, where winemakers have always thought that two grapes blend perfectly well together. This has started to happen even more so now in the whiskey industry. And you will see many times double wood being one of the expressions, and it's usually where it's spent most of its life in a bourbon cask. But then for 6 months to a year, it's actually married in a humongous vat, where it's not going to get too much oak contact, but it is with some sherry, ex-sherry cask whiskey, and then matured together, which gives, whiskey makers now believe, gives more balance. That sounds to me like Bordeaux with Cab Sauvignon and Merlot. Tricky thing is being able to read these things, as I think I said earlier, on the single malt whiskey labels. They're starting to get just a touch better. For instance, if I show you Aberlour 16, they actually do say that this is a double cask matured. And remember, when it says traditional oak cask, that generally means bourbon. That's the terminology, is traditional. Oak cask is an ex-bourbon cask. I'm not going to tell you if it's second fill, third fill, but it's bourbon. And then obviously spends a certain amount of time towards the end in a sherry cask. And Aberlour have nicely told you what they've done. And so you know double cask matured is both bourbon and sherry. Okay, another one, which is a good one to read and simple, but you may not find it. Duty Free, Heathrow, Auchentoshan Heartwood, not 3-wood, which is very popular. But Auchentoshan Heartwood is 2. And it actually says soft nuttiness from bourbon casks and dark fruits from Oloroso. Sherry casks provide the perfect combination for this rich, complex single malt. That's like fabulous. We should actually have that on more whiskey labels so that you have an idea of exactly what the distillery manager and all the staff at the distillery have done. But it's